just like all these things, you're just so protective of them. And I was a really, really nervous mom, and I was just like, oh my God, what if you have to take care of, like you don't sleep, you just worry all the time. And I was like, what if I had to take care of her like this forever? And then I started thinking, what if there was a girl who needed this kind of taking care of forever? So it was like more the idea and my state of mind that sparked that book and that idea. And then I remember just thinking about that girl and what she would do, and I was like, oh, she would read all the time. And the first line of that book is, I have read many more books than you. So I actually heard that line, and I got the idea. And then my second book, it's called The Sun Is Also Starred. It's about like, this Jamaican American girl who's being deported, scheduled to be deported at the end of the day. And she meets this Korean American boy who's very poetic and tells her, I'm going to convince you to fall in love with me in the next 12 hours. And that was a little bit based on me and my husband, although I have never been deported or almost deported or anything like that. But it's a lot based on just like the way we fell in love and some of the conversations we've had, and it's fairly romantic. So that one was just sort of like me and David, and also the idea of how we're all connected. The way that, you know, something I do affects you, and the way you're affected by strangers even. Like say one day you're like in a bad mood and you go into Starbucks and the barista's like, oh, I really like your hair, or I like your shirt, and that makes you like cheer up a little bit. And then sometimes you can pay that forward, right? So maybe you're there, the barista says something nice, and you cheer up and you cross the street to your job and you hold the door open for them, for someone, and that person who had also been having a crappy day now feels better because no one holds the door open anymore. And then both of you get in the elevator and you make moony eyes at each other and you fall in love, and then you have kids of your own, right? So a lot of that book is also about like all those connections and the ways in which we're linked, even though sometimes we think we're not linked to people who don't look like us and who don't sound like us. But we're all connected because we're all human, right? So that book started from like some bigger ideas. Instructions for dancing started because the question I had in my head was like, why do we love people? Because love is terrible. Like it's great, but also terrible because loss is inevitable, right? Like you lose the people you love sometimes, right? They die, you break up, things happen. And so why make yourself so vulnerable to this wonderful thing when it's just going to devastate in the end? I remember when I met David in graduate school, I just like, when we started dating, I was like, oh, this is it. I knew. I was like, I found my person, I love this boy, he's great. And then immediately after that, I just started worrying all the time. Like, if he was out and like, a little bit late, I was like, oh, he got hit by a truck. That's what I would think, because I was like, I have found my person, and now something terrible is going to happen. And then after we had our little girl, it was even worse, right? Because like you are aware that your heart is outside of your body going to preschool, right? And you're like, I can't do anything about this. Like I cannot lose these people. Like I just know that they're just part of me. And then that book was, my mom was very, very sick when I started writing that. And a lot of that book was actually written in the hospital. Like she was going through cancer, and it was just a long, insanely terrible process. And I remember thinking, like, I love her so much, when I cannot, what are we gonna do? Like, I can't lose her. And so that's what that book is about. It's like that idea of like having such a big love, and how do you, is it worth loving someone or loving people when you know that you could lose them eventually? And the main character struggles with that. Whenever she sees another couple kiss, she sees their whole relationship like the beginning, middle, and end. And so the lesson she takes from that is that everything ends, so never do anything, right? And then of course she meets a cute boy that like challenges that, where she's like, well, I can't resist him. So that's what that book is about. And then my adult book was sparked by so many things that, but mostly like this idea of a woman seeking safety, and then finding it in a place that maybe is not the safest place for her. So they all, that's a very long answer, but to say that every book starts differently, right? Sometimes, but mostly it's a question that I have about the world.
Thank you so much. Okay, so that takes me into the next question. It's a good segue because it was about your most recent book. So your latest book is quite different from your previous books. So what inspired you to write that book?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really different, right? So, and I remember before the book came out, I kept trying to tell everyone, this is not a young adult book, and also not a love story. Like, there is love in this book, but it is not a love story. I think a lot of people have been surprised by that. The problem is when you're like an artist, like you can't write the same story over and over, and you just have to know where the art sort of takes you. But this book was inspired by a lot of things. So, do you guys know what One of Our Kind is about? Yeah? Well, you've read it. Yeah. So I'll just give you the quick. It's about this woman named Jasmine who moves to a suburb of Los Angeles. It calls itself a Black utopia, and so everyone there is Black, like the doctors and the lawyers and the teachers and the janitors, like everyone in the town is Black. And it's a really, really wealthy town. And she moves there because she wants to be safe, right? So she figures moving to this town where, you know, if her husband is walking down the street and he's stopped by a cop, the cop's gonna be Black and nothing's gonna happen to him, right? So she moves there for a sense of safety. And when she gets there, she like wants to start a Black Lives Matter chapter. She expects that everyone else is going to be like her. She's a public defender. She expects that people are going to be social justice activists like her. But what she realizes is most of the people there only want to go to the spa. It's like this very wealthy spa at the top of the hill, and most of the people in the town only want to do that. They do not care about social justice. She does find a few people that are more like her, and they start to investigate what's happening in the town. But the more they dig into it, the more dangerous things get. And she has to figure out who really is one of her kind. So that's the pitch for the book. And we've been talking about it as Get Out meets the Stepford Wives. But it was inspired by a few things. There was a conversation I had with a friend of mine a few years ago now. He's Black and an activist, and we had done a panel on race and racism. And then afterwards we went to dinner. And he said, we were having wine, like really too much wine, but at some point he said, do you ever wonder who you would be as a person, or who we'd all be as people if it weren't for the specter of race and racism? And it's one of those questions that is a big, like, very interesting question, but also kind of an impossible question, because it's hard to tease apart who you would be if everything were different. And the thing I always say about it is like, it's like trying to say to a fish, imagine a world without water, right? It's like impossible. So then we just sort of kept drinking and forgot about it, because you can't answer that question. And then there was this Toni Morrison quote that I've known for my whole life, when she says, the very real function of racism is distraction, and that it keeps you from doing your work, and it keeps you having to prove over and over again your reason for being. And I learned that quote when I was pretty young, and it's very influential. Like, I always think about it. And then there was the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered. And I'm actually a very happy, sort of optimistic, sunny sort of person. But I will say that that summer, I really, it was just despair. Like, I was angry, I was very sad, and I did not know how to cope. And the only way I coped was writing my way through it. So I wrote One of Our Kind, and it was partly, I don't want to say inspired, but it was kind of a response to a world that can do something like that to George Floyd. So I wrote it in 6 weeks, which is the shortest it's ever taken me to write anything, the very first draft. And then I revised it for 3 years because I needed to make it into an actual book, because it was very, it was like angry and just the bones of a book, and I had to actually flesh it out and make it into a real thing. So that book was inspired by quite a few things. And there was also the Stepford Wives, which is like an old book. I don't know if most people remember, but people say that all the time and talk about women like, oh, she's such a Stepford wife. But actually, if you read that book, the book is really feminist. And it's about like the men who would do these terrible things to their wife, not so much about like wives being robotic. So I was really inspired by that book too. So that's where that book came from.
Thank you. So I think I'll do one last question for you, and then I'll open it up to the audience for questions. So this one is more, I guess, about process again. So whom do you trust for objective and constructive criticism during your writing process?
Yeah, this is a good one because, my husband is also a writer, and we met in graduate school, and he's the person who reads everything first. So even when I'm writing, if I'm stuck on something, like I will go into his office and be like, help me, and he's a writer too, so he comes into mine, and we'll talk about the story. And then when I'm done with the first draft of a book, he's the person that reads it first and tells me what he thinks. And then I'll revise and then send it to my agent, who's also a really good reader. So she'll read it and say what she thinks, and then I'll revise it. And then we'll get to my editor. And then you just repeat the process over and over again. So I think one of the things to know about writing is that there is always a lot of revision. Like the reason I have a career is not because I'm good at first drafting, it's because I'm good at revising. And to be good at revising just means you're tenacious. Like I will not give up. Like I will write it 50 times, like 100 times. I will just sit there and write it over and over again until it gets as close to the thing I want to say as possible. And I think that's the thing that younger writers don't know, is that the first draft of anything is always terrible. Like it's just trash for everyone, 99% of people. And you have to work to make it good. Like the first draft of everything is terrible. But the draft that you guys have read is pretty good, right? But there's like 100 revisions in between. So I think that's the thing to know, and David reads it first. He's the person I trust the most.
Okay guys, so now it's up to you. So I'm gonna come down off the stage and I'm gonna hand around the microphone and give you guys a chance to ask some questions. Don't be shy. Who wants to go first?
Just to piggyback on what you just said about your writing process, has there ever been a book where there was something that you just, I'm not changing that, and everyone wanted you to change it, you're like, nope, it's staying? Have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, you surround yourself with an editor, or you find an editor that's really, can everyone hear me, or do you want me to use this? Like my editor is very, very smart and thoughtful, and you do need someone like that. But in the end, it is your name on the book, right? And you do have to keep the things that are really important to you. So there's a See You in the Sun Is Also a Star that's just written in play format, and it's kind of out of nowhere. And it doesn't really fit in with the book, except for it fits in with the book, like in my head, right? I don't know why. That's just like writer instinct or whatever. But that stays because, I just needed it to stay. And there's always something like that. Like I say, my editor is really smart. She's much smarter than me. And I listen to her 95% of the time. And then there's 5% of the time when I'm like, no, that one's gonna stay. And then it ends up being the thing that people quote back to me all the time. And my husband has this too, because there's a section of his first young adult book that's written all in Korean. Like it's just Korean. And it's, at first the editor was like, but actually it's such an effective scene, because it shows like what it's like to be an immigrant in the country, and where all the language is totally different around you, because it disorients the reader too, and it's so good. So there's always something like that in every book where you're just like, no, that's just my gut, and I'm going to keep it. That's a great question, though. I've never had that. You guys you can also yell them out. And remember, it's just like 5 of us, so you can ask whatever you want.
Well, I'll ask another question.
Yeah.
You said you have a daughter.
I do.
How old is your daughter? Has she read any or all of yours?
So she's 12.
Oh, she's 12.
Yeah, she's Penny. She has read, her name is Penny, she's read everything,
That's the
everything.
one.
And The Sun is Also a Star.
Mhm.
She liked The Sun is Also a Star is her favorite. And it made her cry. And my child is not a crier, so that was exciting for me. And she came out of her room and she's like, Mama, you made me cry. And we talked about it, it was sweet. But actually her favorite is not my book. Her favorite is her father's book. So he wrote, his second young adult book is called Super Fake Love Song. And it's like really nerdy, just dorky book. And she is a nerd and a dork, just like her father. And she loves that book. Like when she was reading it, it's really funny. And she was just cackling from her bedroom, and then she would come out. I remember this so clearly. She came out and she quoted the book. She quoted the book back to David, like she was like quoting, and he melted into a puddle because like, she loved it so much, and she was just like, she likes my book, she's quoting it to me, and I was like, oh my God, please. The love fest between, she's such a like Papa's girl, you know? So yeah, she's read those two. She hasn't had instructions for dancing yet, and she's not allowed to read one per card.
So I've only read 2 of your books. The Sun is Also a Star. As of right now, The Sun is Also a Star and One of Our Kind. And something that I noticed that I really liked was you did backstories on certain characters and One of Our Kind too, with the news reports and everything. And I was curious, like what inspired that? And also even in your books, the way you do the structure, I noticed that I read some of everything, just the way that it's structured and with the backstories and the little tidbits. I was just curious what inspired you to do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's so weird because I have tried writing books without that, like those interstitials people call them, right? Like the little, you know, and everything. There's like text messages, there's book reviews, there are drawings. My husband did all of that, the drawings and stuff like that for the book. And in The Sun is Also a Star, you get the backgrounds of the people that Daniel and Natasha are meeting during the day. So like the people that are pushing them together and the people that are pulling them apart. And you're seeing why the people that they're interacting with are acting the way they do. And One of Our Kind, you see the backgrounds of some of the people in this town that's called Liberty. And in Instructions for Dancing, you see the relationships that Evie, the main character, can see. You see how those relationships start and begin and end. I don't know why I do that. Like I'm really interested in the reason people do things and the way those reasons affect people that are strangers. Or even people that, people can be a mystery to themselves, right? There's a reason you're doing a particular thing, and sometimes you don't even know why. And the people around you are main characters in their own stories, and still they're affecting you. So I'm always interested in that. Also, I'm really shallow, and I get bored. I say this, and people laugh at me, but I'm not kidding. Writing a book takes a long time, and you have to be interested to keep writing it. And the way I keep myself interested is I like breaking the structure and attacking it from all angles. It just keeps me entertained. So that's part of it. So that's the shallow part. And the other part is I really do think that we are connected so much more than we think we are. Just in general, right? And we do things for so many bigger reasons than we think we're doing them. And I do think if we all actually understood the ways in which we're connected, the world would be kind of a better place, right? Because you would know that to say, hey, you look really nice today, or to hold the door open makes a difference. Like that stuff cascades. Like it does change. It seems small, but a lot of small things put together, it becomes a big thing, right? So that's why I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you read? What inspires you?
I read a lot of romance books.
Yeah.
But let's see, what's inspired me lately? I read a book called The Impossible Us recently, which is a romance novel, but it's star-crossed, but it's because they're in two different dimensions. So, star-crossed love used to be different, and now there's a lot of like multiverse stuff in the world now, but some of these guys are in different multiverses, and that was really good. I read a lot of fantasy. I'm really good friends with Sama Tahir, who wrote the Ember and the Ashes series. I just read her latest one, which is just incredible. A really, really good book. I read maybe 2 books a week, so I read all the time. That's why I also don't watch TV, not because I'm like, I don't care. Like, I just would rather read a book. I play a lot of video games. That's like my vice. I like to shoot things on video games. Yeah, I mean, I read so widely. Like, I really just will read anything you put in front of me until I hate it, and then I'll just throw it across the room. I'm here to tell you it's okay to DNF a book. Like, life is short, you guys. Like, if it's bad, it's bad. Or if you're just not feeling it, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you always know how your book is going to end? Or do you kind of just like write as you're going and kind of figure it out like as you're writing it?
Yeah. That's a really good question. It's one of those things that changes like every time. So my adult book, One of Our Kind, I knew the ending the whole time. And I was trying to write towards that ending. And after I wrote it, I tried to change the ending, and I could not because it was the correct ending. With The Sun Is Also a Star, I did not know the ending before I started it. And it took a long time to figure out what it should be. But then once I figured it out, I wrote it all at once, like just in one sitting, and I never changed a word after that, which never happens. Like you change things so much after you write them down. But the last 10 or 15 pages, I just wrote it, and I didn't revise it or anything, which was weird. Yeah, I try to know the endings because it's easier to write towards, but sometimes you don't know. Like, I'm writing my next young adult book right now, and I'm on deadline for it. And I have a general idea of how it's going to end, but nothing specific, which is kind of driving me crazy because I really want to know what's going to happen. But sometimes you don't know until you're like far in and you get to know the characters really. Like, because I'm just maybe 30 pages in, and I don't know the characters that well yet, which is also what revising is for, right? Because the first time you write a story, I think Hemingway said it's this you telling the story to yourself. And then after that, after you have that first draft, now you know your story. And then you go back in and you make all these connections that you didn't even realize you had written. And so you strengthen those, and you reach a point where you're like, oh, that character would never do that or say that. But you only know that because now you know them a little bit better. So yeah, some books I know, some books I don't know. It just sort of depends. I want to know the end of this book that I'm writing about. Making me nuts. Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to know your thoughts on generative AI and the writing process.
Oh God.
Have you already talked about it?
No. Actually, you're the first person that's ever asked me about generative AI, and I do a lot of events. There's so many things. The first thing is, I don't understand why you would want to, because you don't have to be a writer. Do you know what I mean? Like, I enjoy writing. I wouldn't want to give that away. Like, so I guess I don't understand that motivation, because the whole point of writing is to write. You know, like, I like making stuff up. I like being in that world. I like revising it and getting it to be the thing that's in my head. So there's that. And then there's the more practical thing, which is that it's theft. Like generative AI is theft, right? Like my books have been fed into these large language models and I have not been paid for it. And that's not right. Like there's a list of all the books that have been fed into, and all of mine have, my husband's have, my friends have. You can type in, you know, write in the style of Nicola Yoon. I mean, that's terrible for me, like personally, right? And it's terrible that these big corporations that I think OpenAI is valued at I think they just got like another $7 billion in funding. I mean, that's an absurd amount of money. And artists are not being compensated in any way for theft of their work. So there's that. And then there's the art part, which is art has intention, right? There's a person that has an intention behind it. Like when you read one of my books, I want you to feel something. And I also want to be in conversation with you, right? Like there's a way in which reading a book is to talk to me and to talk to the world and to talk to the ideas. There's an intention and a soul behind it. A human being with who's like actually asking a question and trying to connect our humanity. And there is nothing behind ChatGPT or a large language model, right? There is only the probability that the next word after this one is whatever it is. And so it seems to defeat the purpose of art to me, right? Like it doesn't, because there isn't a human being behind it. So, I mean, do I think you can make like perfectly fine books using it? Sure, but why? Like, why would you want to? Right? Why not actually sit down and write a book? Why not actually read a book with someone who's wanting to talk to you, like a person with an intention? And then these companies, you can't do that. You have to pay people. You're stealing our work. That's just not right. So that's how I feel about it, which is to say I feel poorly about it.
In a library, so do you have a library story, or what do libraries mean to you?
I do have a shameful library story. It's a long story, so I'll make it shorter. Okay, so I grew up in Jamaica, and I was there until I was 11. But when I was about 8 or so, I watched this movie called Poltergeist. You guys? Listen to me when I say 8 is too young to watch Poltergeist, right? But do you guys know this movie? It's a horror movie. And in the movie, there's this tree, and spoiler alert, it basically eats this boy, right? And I was 8, I was at my grandmother's house, and there was a tree, and I was sleeping in my aunt's room. And there was a tree outside the window that I was convinced was the same tree as the one in the movie. So I was terrified. I got off the bed and went underneath my aunt's bed, and she had this box, and in the box was her stash of Harlequin romances that she'd hidden. And if you guys don't know, Harlequin romances are famously these like erotic love stories. And I remember that I was 8 years old, and I was a reader, and I picked up one of these books, and I just started reading it, and I lost my mind. I was like, what is even happening here? There was so much stuff. There's like heaving bosoms and like all of this stuff that I did not understand, and there's so much kissing. It was out of control. And I stayed up all night reading like a Harlequin romance. And then I just was sucked in there. I kept reading them even though I didn't understand them. Fast forward a few years, we moved to America, and we're pretty poor, we're not buying books, but I'm at the library, checking these books out, and then I would check them out and not return them. So that's and then, so like for years I had these books, and then I think I was like 16, and like the guild was too much, and I took all the books and I went back to the library and returned them, and I was afraid that there was going to be a huge fine. But the librarian was great. She's like, it's fine. Thank you for bringing these back. That was it. That's my library story. I'm sorry, it was a long story, but it was the story.
Okay. One of our kind was your first adult book. And personally, I was happy because your other books were beautiful, but I feel like at this big age, I don't always feel, good reading YA books. I was very happy to hear that this book was an adult book. Do you have, I know you said your next one's going to be YA, do you have any, adult books planned in the future, or like, are you happy doing YA, or what influences whether you do a YA or adult book?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to write more adult books, and I have an idea. I'm outlining it as we speak. So, it's funny because when I first wrote Everything, I didn't know that there was like a young adult category. Like, I didn't know what I was writing. I knew the main character was 17, and it was like a coming of age story. But I didn't know that about the categories like in the bookstore until my agent was like, well, this is a young adult book. And, like for us, when we're writing the books, like we're not really thinking about that, like where it gets shelved. Because it's hard to just keep that stuff in your head. You just have to write the story. And I didn't even know that I was going to write One of Our Kind until I had the idea. And I realized, well, this is not for a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old or to read, right? Because, we have like a married main character and all the stuff she goes through, like they're very adult themes. She's pregnant, she has a son, so she has this whole life as a public defender. So it was definitely going to be adult. But it's the book that just dictates that. It's the idea, I guess, that dictates where it's going to end up in the market. For all the other books, like they're definitely, I think of them as coming of age, right? Like the characters are 17, they're trying to figure out who they are and who they want to be in the world, and they're falling in love for the first time. And then with One of Our Kind, it's just not that. But yeah, I mean, I plan to do both. It's funny because because the young adult books have been so successful, what happens is like everyone in publishing kind of wants you to keep doing that same thing because that works, right? But the problem for us as writers is that you just kind of want to go where the ideas take you, right? And it's hard to stay just one place, otherwise you'll just get stuck and it won't be inspired, right? So I took a break and I wrote this and I was inspired to write that. And now that I'm writing I'm on deadline for another young adult, it's because I'm inspired by the story, like I had this idea. And so I think going back and forth will keep me engaged, right? But that's not necessarily what publishing always wants, right? They kind of want you to stick to the thing that works. But if you're an artist, you have to do the thing that speaks to you. So yeah, I do actually have another idea, but it's like a love story. The adult one is not like a thriller. So I'm just gonna keep writing the thing that insists on being written in my head. Yeah.
For I think everything that was the film adaptation, correct?
Yeah.
How much input did you have in that process?
Yeah. I'm gonna tell you something real. so 2 books have been made into movies. And the first time I got the very first version of the Everything script that I saw was terrible. Like I cannot communicate to you how bad I thought it was. Like I literally stopped reading it and I was like, I cannot with this script. Like themes were changed and I was like, why why are we doing this? And I was like, the book is there, the book is good, why are we changing it at all? But after several revisions, it got to be much better. I got to give a little bit of input, right? So I did get to give notes on the script. But when you sell, it's called an option. So like when you have a book and like someone in Hollywood wants to produce it, they do this thing where they give you some money and they have the option to make it. And then once they decide they're going to make it, then they buy the rights. And so at that point, when you sell those rights, they can do anything they want with your book. They can set it in space. Like, they can do whatever. And so, that's why you have to try to be careful with who you're selling it to. And you hope that they love your book, and you hope that they have the same vision for it that you had. But that doesn't always work out. I think Rick Riordan famously hates the first Percy Jackson movies, and he will talk about how much he hates those movies. So a part of it is you have to get lucky. A part of it is that movies are so hard to make. They involve so many people, and sometimes it's just bad luck. You didn't get the actress you want, the actor you want. Schedules didn't work. The editing process was bad. You didn't get the music. Whatever. There's so many things that go into making a movie, as opposed to a book, which is just me in a room, right, and then the editor. So I got to give input, but only because MGM and Warner Brothers felt like asking me. So I got to give input on the script for both Everything, and The Sun Is Also a Star. But listen, I gave a lot of notes, and they didn't take all of them either, too. But having said all that, there is a scene in the Everything movie that I wish I'd written. It's such a great scene, right? So we went from me hating that first draft of the script to watching the movie and thinking, oh, this scene is really beautiful. I wish I'd thought of it for the book. And the conclusion I've come to is that I'm just really glad there's art in the world about the characters that I love. That there's more art, right? So now there's a movie about Maddie and Ollie, and I love those characters. And it's a different thing. It is not the book. But that's okay because it exists and it's about these characters that I still love. And the same thing, The Sun Is Also a Star. Natasha and Daniel in the movie is different than the Natasha and Daniel in the book. But I really like it. I really love the movie. And it's necessarily different. And you sort of make your peace with that. And there's things I miss about it, but there are things that they did better than me too, And I could never be a movie person. I remember the head of the studio, after they made The Sun Is Also a Star, was like, do you want to write a script or whatever? And I was like, absolutely not. No, you could never. And he was so surprised because I think everyone in Los Angeles wants to be a screenwriter, but I think I'm the one that doesn't. He was so surprised. I was like, no. And movies are terrible. I get to be in my room by myself. I don't want all of it's too much for me. I would prefer to be a troll.
Okay. Because I was like, I don't know.
No, listen, we are an intimate group. Ask all your questions, really.
Well, while we're on the movie topic, are your other two books possibly being turned into movies, or do you are you done with having your books turned into movies, or is there any hopes, especially for One of Our Kind?
Yes. So I'm in knock on wood. Yeah, hopefully something's happening with One of Our Kind. I don't know, you guys know about the Hollywood strikes. There was a writer strike and an actor strike, right? So Hollywood is, and because I live there, and I have friends in the industry, I know how devastated the industry is. So not that much is happening, honestly. It's kind of hard for everyone. I have actor friends who, there are no productions happening, and writer friends who, the streaming industry has sort of killed the business, and that's why they were striking in the first place. But nothing's really happening right now. But there is some interest for One of Our Kind, and the tiniest bit of interest for instructional financing. I'm at the point in my career where it really has to be the right fit too, especially for One of Our Kind. because that book is super important to me and also a kind of a delicate topic. And so I am holding out for like, the perfect partner. And even if you find someone that you think is perfect, it could still screw it up, right? But that I'm like unwilling to let go of very easily. And instructions for dancing is the same way because, you know, this is my dream job and I just don't, and I don't have to sell it to Hollywood to feel successful anymore. So like I'm just waiting for someone who I think will do a good job. But I mean, the industry is kind of hard right now. Like it's Hollywood is a little devastated. And I think things are starting to pick up, and it's been a really difficult couple of years for, you know, lots of people that I know and love.
So I wanted to ask about your creative process. So from the idea that you have all the way to the end, are there like any like rituals that you do like while you're writing or anything weird or you have to be in a certain place in a certain tenor, like anything like that?
Yeah, I love this. Yeah, so I'm so strange, like I don't know why I do this, but I write by hand. So like I write the first drafts of all the books by hand. So like I don't have one of my notebooks here, but like everything is like 10 notebooks, like a moleskin, like the Moleskines, I think they're called, like they're 8 by 10, and I just write it out by hand. And I've tried not to write by hand, but it does not work for me for some reason. So that I think that's my weirdest process. And the reason I do it that way is because writing by hand feels really free. Like it feels like it doesn't matter what you do, you can screw up because you can just cross it out and turn the page and it's not a big deal, it's not set in stone. And I think it's because I grew up like writing by hand, like so it feels really free to me, and all the weird ideas and the strange connections that I make for a book, it's always because I'm writing it by hand and I'm just like, oh, whatever. Like I'm flying home this afternoon, and since I'm on deadline, I'll be writing. So like I'm the girl with like the little light on, with my notebook open, like with the headphones on, just writing, like scrolling into my notebook because it makes me feel free. So that's one ritual. And then every 3 or 4 days, I'll type whatever I've written into the computer, and that's like my first revision. And so that's like the process I do. Then once that's done and I started to really revise, I eat a lot of kettle corn. That's my other weird thing. Like it's pretzels and kettle corn, I don't know why. No food while I'm drafting. Lots of food while I'm revising. What else do I do? I mean, it's a job, so I treat it like a job. So after my little girl gets on her bus to school, I go home and I'm at my desk from 8 until about 4. And, you know, you have to, people always talk about inspiration. Inspiration is part of it, but I don't remember who said this, but you have to be there, sitting down at your desk for inspiration to strike, right? Like it doesn't, if you're wandering around not doing it, it's not gonna happen. And the thing that I always say is writing is a muscle and you have to use it. So yeah, I write like pretty much from 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. And then I usually take the weekends off unless I'm on like a serious deadline. Like, you know, with a month to go before the book is due, I'll be writing all the time and be unbearable to be around because you're just consumed by it, and also you're not sleeping enough and so you're basically pissed off all the time. But yeah, that's the writing process. And I don't actually write until 4, I'll maybe write until 2, and then from 2 to 4 is all the business of being an author. So there's like interview questions or like maybe a design for the book or all this other stuff. And writing, like I get a lot of fan email, and if I have time, I'll write back. So there's all this stuff about the business of being a writer, not just the writing itself. And I usually do that later in the afternoon.
Do you listen to music before you write?
No, I can't do it because then I get influenced by the music. I listen to rainstorms, like you know, it's like a white noise and like that. And it's a rainstorm with lightning strikes and birds chirping. And I've listened to it for 10 years, the same thing. I just put my headphones in and do that.
You said you
undergraduate school for something I wasn't writing, and then senior year took a writing class. Was there like a hard pivot for you? Like where you changed your career?
Yeah.
When was that?
So, I don't know, did you guys hear the question in the back? So, she's asking about the fact that I went to college for electrical engineering, like undergraduate, and then my senior year, I took a writing class, and then I went to graduate school for writing. And how was that transition? Like, was it hard? So, you know, I told you in my senior year, I was required to take a class outside of my major. And so the reason I took a writing class is because I thought it was going to be easy. Because all my electrical engineering classes were so hard and they were mostly math. And I thought, oh, whatever, this is going to be easy. As obnoxious, basically. And it honestly was the hardest class I ever took, that writing class. Because to write is to put yourself out there, right? And also, I had never done anything like that before. I like tried to create whole worlds and create people and make you believe that these people would do the things that they're doing and say the things that they're saying. And it's such a hard thing. And I was an idiot to think it was going to be easy, honestly. So yeah, that was a hard transition. And then, but then I loved it too. So like I was willing to sit there and just do it over and over again. And then I went to graduate school, and what you learn, you know, in creative writing school is how to take feedback, right? So because you write this thing and you love it, you think it's great, and then you give it to other people and they're like, no, this sucks. But they say it nicer than that. And honestly, don't, if you are like a aspiring writer, don't associate with people who would be mean about your work either. Like you want people who are kind and helpful. So you want the people who will be like, this is really great, I love this, here are the things you need to work on, and then end with, this is really great, I loved it, right? It's called the critique sandwich. You start with something good, you say the stuff in the middle, then you end with something good. But anyway, I went to graduate school, and that was the transition there was just learning how to put your work into the world and get feedback and then revise it. That's how I learned to revise, is going to graduate school and trying not to feel bad when people don't connect with your work or like it or don't understand it, trying to take the criticism and see what you need to change and what they really mean. And sometimes learning what you don't want to change, right? Learning what you disagree with, learning to trust your own voice as a writer. That's what I learned. And then I worked for 20 years in finance because of the math thing again. And because I did not think I could make a living as a writer. So I did that, but I kept writing on the side. And then the day I finally quit my terrible, terrible finance job was May 22nd, 2015. I still remember, because it was the greatest day. David, my husband, came to my office and helped me with my box. And like packed me up. And we got out of there, and I was so happy to leave. And the funniest part about that is I hadn't told anyone that I had been writing the whole time. And so when I told my boss I was quitting, she's like, oh, where are you going to go work now? Because it's a small industry, finance in Los Angeles. And she's like, where are you going to go work? And I was like, I'm going to go be a writer. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, I wrote this book. It's called Everything, Everything. And it's coming out in September. And like everyone was really surprised. And then there's this one dude who did not work for me because I was like a VP then, and I had like a staff. And he took me out for coffee, and he told me that I was making a mistake. He's like, you should not quit your job. Like, writing is not stable. And I was like, well, I have saved for a long time. Just in case, like, you know, I didn't like make the decision lightly. I saved a bunch of money just in case it didn't work out. I could go back, you know, like I had a plan. And he's like, no, things are gonna fall apart. They're gonna be breadlines. You're being irresponsible. You have a child. You need to look out for her. And I was like, dude, what is happening? It was like one of the strangest conversations I've ever had. But that's just a segue, sorry. But yeah, so I mean, it's definitely hard. And this creative life it's up and down, right? Sometimes the books do really well, and sometimes they don't. And you have to be able to sort of live through that. getting criticism from the public, sometimes it's very painful, actually, right? People will tag you on the internet to tell you that you're terrible or that your books are terrible. And that does not feel good because you're still like a person. And I think that we think it feels different because they're behind the screen, but I am real. And my mom tells me that I need to grow a thicker skin, but it doesn't work, right? Like you can't make art with a thick skin. Those are opposed to each other. So, you know, it's like my dream job and I love it, but there are definitely things that like I would prefer to be in my room all the time. And like this is my favorite kind of thing, actually talking to people. And when you talk about like the author part, I love like connecting and talking to actual human beings. And I hate social media. Like I hate being on there. I think it's just, it's not good for me. I know people love it. I think it's terrible. Because of the connections don't feel real to me. Sometimes they do, and I have a newsletter, and people will respond to my newsletter and ask questions or just sort of chit chat, and I love that. That feels real. But there's so much stuff on social that is just like, and then Goodreads is the worst thing on it. Like, Goodreads is like for devils. I don't know what it is. It's terrible. But then I get emails all the time from, especially from kids who've read everything, and say, oh, I never see Black girls in love stories. Like I get that all the time. And that's amazing to me. Like, oh, people who say everything got them back into reading. I mean, reading's the best thing as far as I'm concerned. So like that makes me so happy. So yeah, I mean, the transition has been weird and interesting. I will say that the creative life is, you know, you just try to roll with it. Things go well and sometimes they don't.
So you mentioned your husband's a writer, and I'm actually in the process of reading the book that you said your daughter liked, the super fake love song. And my question was, I know y'all have a publishing company together. Is there an option of y'all possibly writing a book together, or do you know, sometimes, I know me and my husband can't work together, so like, is that something that could possibly happen in the future, or y'all entertained that thought before?
Yes. So I'll talk about Joy Revolution and the publishing imprint a little bit, and then I'll answer your question. So my husband and I have an imprint. An imprint is just a smaller publishing arm within like a big, so Random House Children's Books is where my young adult books get published, and then they have several imprints, and David and I have one called Joy Revolution, and we publish 6 books a year, and they're love stories starring people of color and written by people of color. And the reason we started the imprint is because when we met in graduate school, we were both romantic goobers, right? Like we loved rom-coms, like romantic books, any kind of movie. Like we'd seen, like any rom-com you can name, we had seen them. And we would talk about them all the time. And then we would talk about the fact that there were never any people of color starring in them, right? Like it was always like the sassy, like the Black girl was always the sassy sidekick, right? And David always says like the Asian guy was always like the lab tech or like the sonogram tech that's like, oh, you're having a girl, you know, like they're never the main character in the story. So we talked about that a lot, and we wanted to figure out a way to change it, but we didn't have any experience, and we didn't have any money, and we just didn't know what we were doing. And it wasn't until, you know, like 20 years later when my books came out and his books came out and we had some success that we could try to do something. And then we pitched the idea to the head of Random House Children's Books that we want to make an imprint because love stories are important. People of color fall in love all the time. Like in high school, I fell in love every day, right? So, like, I mean, and you know, we're not always the side character. We are the main character. Like, we are beautiful and vulnerable and smart, and people fall in love. And we really just wanted to make that happen. And she agreed that it was a good idea, and then we started the imprint. So I think we've been publishing this is our 3rd year of publishing. It's been great, like up and down, like everything else in publishing. So will David and I write a book together? Yes. We have an idea. I will say it's a pretty good one. It's not a young adult one though. And we do get along really well actually. So like, and you know, it's one of those things, like he makes me want to be a better writer. Like, 'cause when I can't write like him, but I also think he can't write like me, but I find this stuff so inspiring. Like, he is like the king of the perfect word for something. Like, he's like the poets are like that. The poets are just out of their minds because they're so good at language, and David is like that. I think I'm pretty good with like emotions and like motivation, like why a person would do a thing. So I think we admire each other, and we get along pretty well. So yes, we're gonna write something together one day, soon-ish.
Do you have any advice for anyone who like wants to write a book? Because I have an idea for a book I've been working on since I was like 12, but I don't like right now. I have like writer's block, and I've had writer's block since I was 12. And I have like a lot that I've written, but I don't know how to continue, or I feel the need to like completely start over.
Okay. You're my people right now, I have to tell you. Okay. Just get to the end. Like, really, truly. Just get to the end. Right? Don't start over. Like, the worst thing is, like, the blank page, right? Like, you, up on your computer or in your notebook or whatever, it's the worst thing. It's the worst thing for your favorite author, too, right? What I will say is, just write your way through, right? It's okay that first draft is disconnected and disjointed and terrible and you're not sure what you're doing, but you can fix something. The problem is you can't fix nothing, right? But you can fix it if it's terrible, but you can't fix it if it's not there. And I promise you that I go through this every single time that I start a new book. Like, it's terrible. I think that I'm the worst writer that ever lived, and that why are people paying me for this, and I should never write it. Like we're laughing, but I genuinely think this. And I will go through my house crying about it, and David will be like, get over it. Get it together, woman. But, that doubt that you're feeling, that's part of the process. And I know that in my head, that is part of the process, and that when you get to the middle of the book especially, it feels like you're in the middle of the ocean and you're not sure what you're doing. And I know that that's part of the process. It doesn't make it less painful, but if you can just hold on to that idea that it's part of the process and you're gonna get through it, then you will surprise yourself on the other side of it, because then you have the thing and you can look at it for what it is. You can fix it. You can revise it, and every single revision will get better. So the way you're feeling now as a young writer is the way that writing feels. So you're doing great, is what I'm trying to tell you. You just get to the end of that story and you can get it done. When you get to the end of the story, find a group, the other important parts, just find a group of people that you trust. Maybe a writing group, they have to be kind. These people, you don't want anyone telling you this is terrible or the worst thing, that's useless, right? People who maybe share your same aesthetic or the kind of books that they like, and then get them to give you their honest feedback, right? And then you take it in and revise the things that you agree with, and just, do that over and over again. And then you will have a book at the end of it. It's just one step in front of the other, one page at a time, one word at a time. It sounds so cliche what I'm saying, but I promise you it's the way. And I love young writers. I love starting out because it feels impossible, but I promise you I can do it and I'm a bum. You can do it. Like the doubt is just it's so big sometimes and it's so overwhelming. But it's part of it. And then you just like, you gotta get done. Just get to writing the words at the end is like the most glorious thing in writing. But just get to that, the end, and you have it. And then you can put it aside for a week or two and do something with your life. And then open it again and see what you have. Because you can fix anything. Really.
Thank you.
Yeah. One day I want to come to a signing.
Hopefully.
So, in the books of yours that I've read, I like how your inspiration is so clear in different things. Like in The Sun is Also a Star. There's a quote by Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think you have to
Carl Sagan is that one, because he was a professor. Yeah, no.
Okay.
He's a professor at my school. I saw him talk, and I was so inspired by him. Yeah.
Okay, so one guy, but that quote,
Yeah.
I like how
Yeah.
there's just all these different quotes in the two at the beginning of this book. You obviously consume a lot of different books and writers, or even like you can see the inspirations of this book. So my question, long-winded, how do you consume your books? You said you read about two a week. Like, are you an audiobook person, or do you have to have a hard copy? Yeah, just curious.
I have a Kindle. I know I'm not supposed to, but I do because I have a lot of books, and also I travel a lot, and it's a lot. They're very heavy. So I'm mostly a Kindle person, but if I love a book, also I will buy it because I just have to have the book itself. I'm reading Color Television by Danzy Senna right now. Have you read that one? It's very good, and I already know that I'm buying it. So I'm in the middle of it. I'm about to buy it and put it on the shelf. So I do both. For nonfiction, I'll listen to. So I'm listening to a book called Untangled right now, which is about raising girls, right? Because I have a 12-year-old, and it's about raising adolescents, and she's confusing, and so I'm listening to this book because I need to understand her. But yeah, that's how I do it. Nonfiction for audio, and then I read the books. But you have to understand, like, it's compulsive for me. Like, I just have to read something. Like, if I'm not, like, I'm on deadline, so I'll be writing on the plane, but otherwise I'd be reading. And when everyone else is watching TV, I'll be reading, like with everyone, but I'm reading. Or playing the video games, like I said, because that is truly my vice. So that's how I take them in. I mean, I do think that reading is one of those things you have to do if you're going to be a writer too, because then you just make all these weird connections that I think you wouldn't necessarily if you weren't reading.
What video games are you? Like, you say you're a gamer.
Yeah.
There's different types, but yeah, what video games do you play?
God, my favorite recently was called Ghost of Tsushima, which is like, very bloody, like, very bloody game. You're in like a ninja, basically. It's set in old Japan, and you have to kill. That is, the last Star Wars game was pretty good. What else? I've been playing Astrobot on the PS5. That's not bloody, it's a platformer. That one's really good. I'm almost done with that, which I'm kind of sad about because it's been a fun game. And then David just took over the consoles because he's playing the new Zelda, which I hate Zelda, but he really loves Zelda, so that's what's happening in the house now. But I really like the first person, like, shooters or slashers, like the bloodier the better.
Did you play like the Last of Us, like that, those games?
Oh God.
Or were you just like
I can't. So David loves those. Those are his favorite games. But they're so scary. They're so creepy. And honestly, Last of Us is like the saddest video game I think that's ever been made. So no, I can't play those. I can't play the horror ones, weirdly.
I usually like, I'll watch people play them. I don't ever play, like, I'm not a video game person, like,
Yeah.
but I'll like watch people play them.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah, no, I
played
mean,
it technically.
it's fun to watch people play. Like, I mean, I remember at the beginning of our relationship, I used to just, because I wasn't such a gamer until I met David. I would watch him play, and then I started playing now. Like, now I'm sucked in. But the scary ones, man, that Last of Us is scary. And actually, I think one of the first video games that has felt like art to me. Like, because it has such a point of view, you know?
Yeah. I have one last book question.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you saw your first books on the shelves? Like when you walked in, you was like, "That's me."
Oh, I totally cried.
You did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the first time I held the advanced reader copy in my hand, I was in New York at my editor's office, and I just burst into tears. And then when I saw it on the shelf too,
You just buy all of them.
no, I didn't have any money. So, yeah, no. And then the first time I saw David and my books on the shelf too, because he published a few years after I did. But they, since we have the same last name, they were sitting next to each other, like on the bottom shelf, because we're Yoon, so it's also on the bottom. That made us both cry. I think we have a photo of that one too. But yeah, it still feels like a miracle. When I walk into a store, I'm like, wait, really? It's here? You know, like it just doesn't. And then even getting the chit chat like about it, like part of me is like, oh yeah, this is my life, and there's another part of me that's like, are you kidding me? Did I get to do this? So yeah, it's pretty great though.
Do you get like imposter syndrome sometimes about it?
All the time. I mean, all the time. Like I was on, oh God, Seth Meyers' show this previously in the summer. And that was surreal. I was like, wait, am I really going out to meet Seth Meyers? Like I was in the green room, Eddie Murphy was there, did not get to meet Eddie Murphy. He had like a whole, listen, they told us you were allowed to bring 2 people with you. Like besides my family, so like my agent and my publicist were with me, but that's it. Eddie Murphy had like 20 people. He had an entire entourage, and they basically surrounded him, so you could barely not even like sort of see into. David saw him, I did not. And I was in the green room when Seth Meyers comes in, and he started talking to me. He'd obviously read the book. He's the nicest guy, and I got one of those. It's like I should be not here. Like you need to be talking to someone else. But that was actually a really great experience after that. Like, you sort of just put it aside and go do, because it's your job too, right? So you just go do your job. The other moment that was crazy with that was when I finally walked onto the stage, because like the studio audience was like over here, and I looked and everyone's clapping and cheering, and it was so overwhelming. I was like, oh, I will not be able to do this if I pay attention to this, right? Because it's just, you're like, all these people, and it's crazy. And so I looked away. I said, I'm going to focus on Seth Meyers, because I can talk to one person. I can't talk to that. Like, we're paying attention to that. And then we hugged, and he's a good hugger, so that was a good sign. And then I sat down at his desk, and I just talked to him, you know, like, and I just talked to him like if someone, he clearly liked the book, and I just chit-chatted with him. And it turned out really well, because I just talked to him, and like, just talk to him as a person who likes books and who writes books. So sometimes it's a matter of just like compartmentalizing. I'm good at compartmentalizing. It's like, I'm not thinking about that right now. I'll like get overwhelmed after. And then afterwards I was just like, Jesus Christ, what the hell did I just do? And then I watched it after and I was like, all right, you were not the worst thing on earth. So that was good. Because I've done movies that are a bit bad, and I was just like, oh, you were obviously tired, or what did you just say there? Like, you know, there's some bad interviews of me and bad photos of me in the world.
Anybody else? could do this all day, but I know she's got a flight to catch, so we're gonna have to start wrapping up. So maybe 2 more questions? Not to put pressure on you guys.
Well, there's a question somewhere in here. So in the 2 books that I've completely finished of yours, I was very intrigued about how they ended. So, and how it just wasn't a, wrapped up, happy ending. Sometimes in those type of books, they are not YA, but just in general they are.
Yeah.
And like, you say that you sometimes have the ending in mind. Are you open to like any type of ending, or even in One of Our Kind, it's like it wasn't a bad ending. It wasn't like a horrible, like the world ended, but it was kind of like a life just kind of went on, and what happened type of thing. Are you like, are you a happy ending type of person, or do you just?
I understand what you're saying. It's not even a happy ending, it's the right ending, right? So I can feel it when I've got the ending that it's supposed to be, but I don't know I don't even know how to describe it, but I can feel it when it's right. And if it's wrong, then I have to just do it again. For One of Our Kind, I will tell you that the ending has been controversial of that book. And believe me, I've heard about it. I tried to write a different ending for that book, and it wasn't right. It just wasn't. It's just that, the job of a writer is to tell the truth, right? And you have to write the true thing, and the true thing for those characters was the way the book ended, and that is what I always try to do. So I don't think of them as happy endings or sad endings. I just think of them as the true endings for the characters. I will say I think all my books have had One of Our Kind aside. All my young adult books have happy endings, or happy enough endings, young adults. One of Our Kind is its own thing. I don't know what happened there.
It was like and when I said bad, I mean unhappy or not.
Yeah.
But it's even in The Sun Is Also a Star, I liked how they, that part of that romance didn't happen, but there was a chance for the rekindling.
Yeah.
So it's just it was just so, it was very real, and it reminded me of there was I guess he was a children's lawyer, Walter D. Myers.
Oh yeah.
He had a book, Somewhere in the Darkness, and the young boy went through this whole ordeal, and then at the end of it, life just went on.
Yeah.
So it was I kind of got that same feeling from these books, this thing happens, and life just went on.
Life is kind of like that, right? Even when my mom was really sick, I spent so much time in the hospital, and then I would leave, and everyone was still outside, and their lives were still happening, and we were all devastated. But I also had to get my kid to school, right? And I had to write, and I had to, life is just kind of like that, even though these things are happening, great or not, everything else is still happening, and you have to, you're stuck in that ocean, and you gotta swim along and keep moving. And it's sort of wild to me that life can go on in the middle of devastation. Even right now, look at the world is crazy. And this election is never going to end. It's actually going on forever. It's just going to be for the rest of our lives. But everything still goes on, right? Good. All right, well, you guys are awesome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking all your questions. It's really been a pleasure. I don't get to do the smaller and the sort of chit chat, so it's been really nice actually.